I know who killed JonBenét. There's no doubt in my mind who killed JonBenét. I ordered him to put JonBenét down. I knelt next to her and I leaned down to her face. And John leaned down opposite me, and his face was just inches from mine. And we had a nonverbal exchange that I will never forget. And he asked if she was dead. And I said, yes, she's dead. And I told him to go back to the room and to dial 911.
You know, America has just been hurt so deeply with this.
You believe it's someone outside your home.
There is a killer on the loose. I don't know who it is. I don't know if it's a he or a she. But if I were a resident of Boulder, I will tell my friends to keep your babies close to you. There's someone out there.
The thing that I remember about her was that
were John Ramsey's odd behaviors, those subtle signals Linda Arndt described, and his unsettling reactions in televised interviews, just surface symptoms of something far darker beneath? And if so, who or what was the real power shielding the Ramseys from the consequences the rest of us would have faced? John Ramsey's plan. Linda Arndt, the only law enforcement officer inside the Ramsey house that morning, couldn't reconcile what she was witnessing. The family had reported a kidnapping. A ransom note clearly stated a deadline, yet when that time came, no one said a word. Not John, not Patsy, not their friends. No checking the clock, no panic. Just an eerie, hollow silence that stretched across the house like a fog. Patsy and John stayed apart. Not once did they comfort each other. No hugs, no whispers. They existed like two strangers in a shared tragedy. Linda noted it, not with judgment, but with instinct. Something about the emotional distance between them. It wasn't shock. It was a misalignment. And John. Linda caught him in the kitchen, flipping through his mail. Not searching for clues, just sorting envelopes. It didn't belong. A man with a missing daughter should be breaking down walls. Instead, he was reading letters, calm, focused, too calm. By late morning, pressure built. Linda, still alone without backup, asked John and Fleet White to help search the house again, floor by floor, not touching anything. A simple, methodical instruction. But John ignored the process entirely. He went straight to the basement. No hesitation. No detours. As if he knew exactly where to go. Then came the scream, Fleet calling for an ambulance. Moments later, John emerged from the basement. In his arms was the lifeless body of JonBenét. He wasn't calling for help. He wasn't yelling for someone to call 911. He simply carried her upstairs, his face unreadable, and laid her on the floor. Linda froze. Every warning in her head fired at once. He'd touched the body. He'd removed her from the scene. The entire crime scene, contaminated in seconds. JonBenét was stiff, pale, long gone. But John didn't stop. He walked to a chair, grabbed a throw blanket, and, without permission, covered her. A gesture that might seem gentle to an outsider, but for Linda, it was devastating. He didn't ask until after the blanket was already in place. She tried to intervene, but it was too late. Then came the moment that stuck with her forever. As she knelt beside JonBenét, John leaned in. His face is just inches from hers. Their eyes locked, and Linda, silently, slid her hand toward her gun. She counted the rounds. 18. Not because she was afraid of some unknown danger, but because she believed, fully, unquestionably, that the killer was in the room, and hadn't gone anywhere. And it didn't stop there. After everything, the strange behavior, the violations of protocol, the chaos, Linda expected the system to react, to investigate thoroughly, to demand answers. But that's not what happened. Instead, the investigation twisted. The machinery stalled, leads dried up, evidence disappeared. Interviews were delayed or softened. Linda later said it outright, I know who killed JonBenét. And yet, she couldn't say the name. The message was clear. Someone was being protected. She watched as the truth became a casualty of politics, fear, or influence. And when she said, "The killer will get away with murder," she wasn't being cynical. She was speaking from experience. But nothing was more surreal than the silence from the outside world that morning. Linda had been trapped inside that home for over 3 hours. With 9 people, John, Patsy, their pastor, and several friends, moving freely, whispering behind doors. Not one detective arrived to relieve her. No forensic team entered. No containment was established. She called for support multiple times. Each time, she got the same excuse: everyone's in a meeting. A meeting, while she stood alone in a potential, surrounded by unpredictable witnesses, and a child lying dead just feet away. Her chain of command was unavailable. The delay wasn't just negligent, it was bizarre. Then, at 1:10 p.m., after JonBenét had been found, after Linda had radioed it in, after she had raised her voice, nothing changed. The house remained unsecured, and then she saw it, an ambulance driving slowly past the house without stopping. That's when she said it. Not in frustration, not for drama, but in honest disbelief. I thought, I am in the twilight zone. Because in any sane world, that house would have been locked down. Backup would have arrived within minutes. The body would have been photographed in place. Witnesses separated. Notes taken. A real investigation would have begun. But in Boulder, that day, none of it happened. Linda Arndt had walked into a house expecting to monitor a ransom call. Instead, she was left alone to guard a body, surrounded by people who didn't act like victims, and betrayed by a system that never showed up. And somewhere in that house, she believed, the truth had been buried, alongside a little girl who would never come back. But the most telling move came not from what they did in front of police, but what they did outside of them. John and Patsy Ramsey didn't wait for charges. They didn't wait to be named suspects. They didn't even wait for an accusation. They lawyered up immediately. Within hours of JonBenét's body being found, the Ramseys hired profile criminal defense attorneys, separate ones for each parent. Not a family lawyer, not legal aid, full-blown crisis management. And from that moment on, they stopped cooperating. They declined formal police interviews. They wouldn't sit down with detectives under normal procedure. Every question had to go through counsel. Statements were reviewed, rewritten, and filtered. What had begun as a kidnapping, then revealed as a kidnapping, had now become a legal standoff. And then came the polygraphs. When the pressure mounted, when public suspicion grew louder, the Ramseys agreed to take lie detector tests, but not through law enforcement. Not with the Boulder police. They arranged it privately, through their own team, on their own terms. Controlled environment, handpicked examiner, no oversight. The results, mixed, conflicting. Some said they passed. Others claimed the tests were inconclusive. And of course, because the tests weren't done through official channels, the results weren't admissible. But it didn't matter. The media ran with it. Ramseys clear themselves in polygraph, the headlines said. But for the investigators, it changed nothing. In fact, it made things worse. Because, the truth is, innocent people don't need to create alternate systems of justice to prove their innocence. They don't need PR campaigns. They don't need lie detector tests administered behind closed doors with no transparency. They don't need to control the narrative, unless they're afraid of the real one. But just when it seemed the silence couldn't grow deeper, they spoke through lawyers. John and Patsy Ramsey, still untouched by any formal charges, made a calculated move. They didn't turn to the police. They turned to the press. And before the public could ask too many questions, they unveiled what looked like an answer: polygraph tests. But not the kind conducted by federal agents or local detectives. These were paid for, arranged, and overseen by their own legal team, a maneuver that said less about cooperation and more about image control. April 2000. 4 years had passed. The trail had grown cold, suspicion thick, reputation stained. That's when the Ramseys hired Edward Gelb, not just any examiner, but a former president of the American Polygraph Association, a man with credentials, television appearances, and a name that could lend credibility to a crumbling narrative. Before him, they tried another expert, Jerry Torriello, but the first results: inconclusive, useless, not guilty, not innocent, just noise. Torriello didn't declare deception, but he didn't clear them either. He recommended another round. So they did it again. In May, John sat for 2 sessions, Patsy 3. The questions were sharp, simple. Did you kill your daughter? Do you know who did? Did you write the ransom note? According to Gelb, they passed. Cleanly. No deception indicated. Not a flicker. Not a tremble. Not a single spike across the graph. But none of it mattered. Not to the Boulder Police Department. Not to the FBI. Not to anyone who understood that truth doesn't come from machines hired by the people being questioned. The tests weren't independent. They weren't court-sanctioned. They weren't observed by detectives. They were performed in private, behind legal barricades, under complete control of the subject's own defense team. To the authorities, it reeked of orchestration, a public show, a cleanup operation. The Ramseys had refused polygraphs offered by the FBI twice. But now, with public pressure mounting and media optics shifting, they were ready to sit in front of a machine, so long as they could choose who turned it on. Even the format raised doubts. Multiple tests, spaced closely together. The same questions, phrased and rephrased. Enough repetition to dull fear, to normalize stress. Experts warned that such structure diminished reliability, that truth under pressure didn't always wait for a technician's nod. Then, there was the third voice, Cleve Baxter, another veteran in the field, brought in to review the charts. He confirmed Gelb's interpretation, said the Ramseys showed no intent to deceive. But again, none of them were law enforcement. None of them were neutral. Every face in that room had been handpicked by the defense. And the most glaring omission: Burke, the only other person known to be inside the house that night, never tested. Not once. No official request. No public explanation. Years later, his lawyer would claim he was willing. But there's no record of wires strapped to his chest. No questions asked. No graphs drawn. Just silence. To Linda Arndt, it was another brick in the wall. Another door locked from the inside. These weren't the moves of desperate, devastated parents clawing for justice. These were tactical steps by people managing exposure, controlling damage, building a narrative they could survive, not in court, but in public perception. Because the goal wasn't a conviction. It was preservation, of reputation, of control, of distance from the truth. And the truth, it was no longer being pursued. It was being managed.
You had said recently in an interview that you were willing to take a lie detector test, and apparently the Boulder police are now saying, let's set it up. Will you do it?
We were asked, had we been asked to take a lie detector test? We said no.
Why didn't you take a lie detector test?
No one ever asked us
Really?
to take the lie detector test.
Police never asked you to take a lie detector test?
No.
But when the cameras shifted, so did the truth. What John Ramsey said in one studio unraveled in another. On Larry King Live, seated beside his wife, the backdrop a carefully arranged promotion of their newly released book. John leaned forward and declared with clarity, "We were asked would we take a lie detector test. We said certainly we would." Patsy nodded, adding conditions: an independent examiner, a professional with national credibility. The implication was unmistakable. They had nothing to hide, and they were willing to prove it. But just weeks later, in a separate appearance with Barbara Walters on 20/20, the tone changed. The memory blurred. When Walters asked directly why neither had taken a polygraph, John didn't repeat the earlier confidence. He didn't mention readiness. He didn't cite fairness or conditions. Instead, he said, flatly, "No one asked us." Not only that, he recounted a conversation with a detective who posed a hypothetical scenario. "If I were to ask you to take a polygraph, what would you say?" John's answered, "I'd be offended." This wasn't a misquote. This wasn't an editing trick. This was a man delivering two fundamentally different versions of the same story, each tailored to its audience, each serving a different purpose. The first, on CNN, was crafted to sell a book. Repair public perception, present the couple as calm, cooperative, composed. There. The polygraph was a symbol, a line they were willing to cross. The second, on ABC, was rooted in defensiveness, in the framing of persecution. There, the polygraph became a trap, a slight, something beneath dignity. So which was true? By that point, the real answer had been buried beneath Hearst appearances and shifting narratives. Because the truth was more inconvenient than either version, they had taken polygraphs, privately, quietly, and entirely under their own control, just not with law enforcement. But instead of acknowledging that reality, they rewrote it depending on who was holding the microphone. And that contradiction didn't go unnoticed. It wasn't just about a test. It was about trust. If they were willing to revise the record about something so verifiable, so public, what else were they reshaping? What other facts had been bent to fit the frame? To Linda Arndt, to the investigators who stood alone in that house, and to those still chasing the truth years later, this wasn't forgetfulness. It was strategy.
It was reported also, Mr. Ramsey, that shortly after you found your daughter's body, that you called the pilot of your plane to arrange a flight to Atlanta. Is that true?
I did. We had been asked to leave the house. Within minutes of that happening, the police took the house over. We had nowhere to go. Atlanta was our home. We lived in Atlanta for 25 years. That's where our family was. We wanted to go home.
The moment John Ramsey placed a call to his private pilot, just hours after cradling his daughter's lifeless body, marked more than just a reaction to grief. It was a calculated pivot, a movement away from the epicenter of investigation. He would later tell Barbara Walters that Atlanta was home, that they simply had nowhere else to go. But that wasn't the full picture. Because John didn't leave Boulder alone. Not long after the Ramseys departed, another family boarded a separate flight, heading the same direction Fleet and Priscilla Stine, the very couple who had been by the Ramseys' side since the morning of December 26th, the family that took Burke Ramsey in while the house was still an active crime scene. The couple whose presence in the house, and especially in that basement, was far more critical than anyone seemed willing to acknowledge at the time. Fleet White, John's close friend, and the man who followed him into the basement that morning, was the only other person to witness firsthand what lay behind that door. He was there when JonBenét's body was discovered. He saw the tape, the bindings, the room, the state of her body, and within days, he was gone. Not just from the house, from the entire state. That's not grief. That's a coordinated exit. The police never stopped them. No one questioned the timing. But for those watching, those inside the investigation, it wasn't just the Ramseys who were distancing themselves from the epicenter of the crime. It was the very people closest to the moment the truth was uncovered. Why did both families leave Boulder so quickly? Why did the man who witnessed the crime scene with his own eyes also vanish, almost in parallel with the parents? And why did their relationship begin to quietly deteriorate in the months that followed? None of it made sense. Unless you consider the possibility that someone saw something, or knew something, or had been told something that made staying behind too dangerous. What began as one family leaving a crime scene became two. And just like that, the silence grew larger. Because the Ramseys weren't just leaving behind a house. They were leaving with the only people who had shared the most critical moment of that morning. The Stines weren't just family friends. They were the Ramseys' inner circle. Fleet and Priscilla Stine had known John and Patsy for years. Their children played together. They shared holidays, attended church, hosted dinners. In Boulder's tight-knit upper-class social scene, they were practically extended family. When tragedy struck on December 26, 1996, it was the Stines who were called. It was their home that Burke Ramsey was quietly taken to, away from the chaos. It was Fleet White, not a detective, not a responder, who accompanied John into the basement and saw JonBenét's body with his own eyes. But their role didn't end there. And more importantly, it didn't stay silent. Over time, Fleet White would emerge as one of the few people close to the Ramseys willing to speak publicly and critically. His relationship with John soared. His confidence in the investigation collapsed. He began writing open letters, challenging the DA, questioning the integrity of the case, and even accusing law enforcement of protecting certain individuals. Yet, in those first crucial days, the Stines were side by side with the Ramseys, not just as grieving friends, but as key eyewitnesses to the aftermath, the behavior, the decisions that shaped the investigation from inside the house. They knew what Boulder looked like in the hours after JonBenét's death. They knew what was said, what wasn't, and they left Boulder too. The question isn't just who the Stines were. The question is, what did they see before they chose to disappear? Among the many names that have surfaced around the JonBenét Ramsey case, the Stine family, Glenn and Susan, remains one of the most curiously under-scrutinized. On the surface, they were merely family friends. But if one traces their movements before, during, and especially after the night of JonBenét's murder, a different picture begins to emerge, one of proximity, access, and inexplicable devotion. On the evening of December 25, 1996, just hours before JonBenet would be reported missing, the Ramseys stopped by the Stine's house to drop off Christmas gifts. According to Susan Stine, Patsy stayed and chatted for around 10-15 minutes. She described the Ramseys as cheerful, festive, and excited about their upcoming trip. No signs of exhaustion, no abnormal behavior. Strangely, she never mentioned JonBenet being sleepy or drowsy. That omission may seem minor, until one contrasts it with Patsy's later statement to police, where she claimed JonBenet had fallen asleep in the car and was carried directly to bed by John. Was this a harmless inconsistency, or a fabricated detail added to establish a timeline and cover alibi gaps? 2 days earlier, on December 23rd, the Ramseys held a Christmas party at their Boulder home. During the event, a mysterious 911 call was made and abruptly hung up. Police responded. But when they arrived, it was Susan Stine, not a Ramsey, who answered through the intercom and told officers the call had been a mistake, allegedly made by a guest attempting to dial long distance. She refused to let them in. Why was a guest acting as the gatekeeper? And why deny entry to police after a 911 call, especially in the home of a high-profile family? Even if it was truly an accident, Susan's assertive intervention raises uncomfortable questions. But the deeper questions begin after the tragedy. When JonBenet was found dead and the Ramseys were thrust into the center of suspicion, they didn't move in with family. They moved in with the Stines. Not for a night, not a weekend, but for months. Patsy later described that period as salvation for her sanity. In turn, Susan quit her job, a professional position at the University of Colorado, to care for Patsy full-time. She cooked, organized, handled visitors, managed logistics, described by others as a Florence Nightingale figure in the house. It wasn't just compassion. It was a total personal sacrifice, one that makes sense only if there was more at stake than friendship. Then, in mid-1997, came the most baffling move of all. Both families relocated to Atlanta, Georgia. The Ramseys moved first. John had family there and a corporate base. But soon after, the Stines followed. Glenn resigned from his job, sold their Boulder home, and moved his entire family to a new home not far from the Ramseys. Their son, Doug, was enrolled in Holy Innocents Episcopal School. Burke Ramsey went to the Lovett School, both in Atlanta. The families vacationed together, shared holidays, and even transported each other's children across state lines. On one occasion, the Stines personally drove Burke from Georgia to the Ramseys' Michigan summer home. In John's words, Burke felt completely at home with the Stines because they had lived together for so long. This level of entwinement goes far beyond normal friendship. It borders on logistical codependence. Yet, in his initial police interview, John described the Stines as mere acquaintances. That contradiction between what was told to investigators and what actually happened casts a long, uneasy shadow. No public record suggests financial transactions or shared legal defense. But Glenn and Susan both left stable careers to follow a family under investigation for child murder across the country. No one does that without deep loyalty, entanglement, or shared stakes. Were they protecting the Ramseys, or protecting something bigger than all of them? As the investigation evolved, the Stines faded into the background. But their movements, decisions, and access during the most sensitive hours of the case remain undeniable. And if anyone outside the immediate Ramsey family knew more than they said, the Stines are the first place to look. Underneath the surface of unwavering loyalty, Susan Stine's role in the JonBenét Ramsey case crossed into territory far beyond simple friendship. Her actions, calculated, deliberate, and at times, legally questionable, revealed a willingness to disrupt official channels, manipulate public narratives, and shield the Ramseys from scrutiny by any means necessary. Nowhere was this more evident than in the email impersonation scandal that unfolded between 2000 and 2003. Susan Stine created a fake Hotmail account, carefully styled to resemble the official communication line of Boulder Police Chief Mark Beckner. From that address, she sent multiple emails to journalists, investigators, and individuals deeply involved in the Ramsey investigation. The emails weren't jokes. They weren't satire. They were crafted to appear as if Beckner himself was endorsing certain narratives, praising pro-Ramsey articles, or quietly supporting anti-police sentiments. One such email went to veteran reporter Charlie Brennan, complimenting his writing. Another was addressed to former lead detective Steve Thomas, implying institutional support in his legal clash with the Ramseys. The deception was exposed only after Brennan contacted Chief Beckner directly, who denied ever sending such correspondence. Alarmed, Boulder authorities traced the IP address, linked it to an Earthlink account, and eventually uncovered the origin Susan B. Stine, operating from 1060 Long Grove Drive, Atlanta. When contacted by Georgia investigators in June 2003, Susan refused to answer questions, though the Boulder DA considered criminal charges, including impersonating a law enforcement official, which could qualify as a felony. She faced no legal consequence. Instead, authorities issued a written warning. Susan dismissed the entire operation as a silly prank, claiming she had no intent to deceive, framing it as sarcastic humor. But humor doesn't explain the clear pattern of interference, nor the strategic timing of the emails during a period of heightened legal pressure for the Ramseys. It wasn't random. It was deflection, engineered messaging designed to sway opinion under the false imprimatur of authority. But email impersonation wasn't her only act of intervention. In February 1997, while the Ramseys were residing in the Stine home, a reporter from the Globe, Ken Harrell, approached their doorstep for an interview. Susan cracked the door open, asked to see his press credentials, and upon him producing his wallet, snatched the ID and slammed the door shut. She then called the police, claiming a suspicious individual was lurking around her property. When officers arrived, Harrell, understandably agitated, was initially treated as a potential threat until his identity was verified. Susan had manufactured a confrontation to remove the media from her doorstep. John Ramsey, who was present during the incident, later shared the story with his staff at Access Graphics, not with concern, but amusement, praising Susan's quick thinking and referring to it as a masterclass in handling the press. In internal circles, Susan had earned the nickname Patsy's Pitbull, not merely a protector, but an enforcer, someone who preemptively neutralized perceived threats, whether that be a journalist, an investigator, or a curious onlooker. And Susan wasn't alone. Glenn Stine, her husband, also took an active role. On at least one occasion in 1997, he and John reportedly chased down a National Enquirer photographer on the streets of Atlanta, attempting to confiscate exposed film. Their methods may not have been illegal, but they were calculated efforts to restrict access and shape optics, further insulating the Ramseys from external examination. At the core of all these behaviors was Susan's relationship with Patsy, a bond that blurred the line between friendship and entanglement. After JonBenét's death, Susan didn't merely offer support. She vacated her job, opened her home, and took on full-time care responsibilities for Patsy. Patsy later wrote of Susan as the mother of the household, our private nurse, our Florence Nightingale. Susan was present in family trips, doctor visits, holiday celebrations, and perhaps most telling, every key media event. Rumors even swirled that she once wore a wig to impersonate Patsy and mislead photographers during a critical press window. Though never confirmed, the tale underscored just how far she might go to shield her friend from exposure. Susan also maintained a vigilant presence online. She frequented forums, combated negative commentary, and reportedly tried to erase or discredit any content that cast Patsy in a suspicious light. Among investigators and journalists, she was viewed as a gatekeeper of Patsy's image, perhaps even controlling the flow of information in and out of the inner circle. Former Detective Steve Thomas even once called her the information minister of Ramseyland. Doug Stine and his threatened. The Stines show up so often in the JonBenét Ramsey case. It's hard not to wonder, were they just loyal friends? Or is there something more, especially when it comes to their son, Doug Stine? The hypothesis that Doug Stine was involved in JonBenét Ramsey's killing is grounded in several key details surrounding the events of Christnight 1996. Doug Stine, a close friend of Burke Ramsey, was present at the Ramsey home earlier that evening when the family stopped by to drop off a gift. Physical evidence found at the crime scene raises questions about his potential involvement. A high-tech boot print discovered in the wine cellar, initially a point of intrigue, was later identified as belonging to Burke. But Doug's presence at the Ramsey house that night prompts speculation about his role. Additionally, a red Boy Scout knife owned by Burke was found in the wine cellar, and the white nylon cord used to strangle JonBenét appeared to have been cut with this knife, suggesting some activity involving the children. A Webster's dictionary found open to the word incest at the scene further fuels speculation about an unusual event possibly involving Burke or Doug, pointing to a disturbing context for their interactions. The hypothetical scenario posits that after the Ramsey family returned home from the Stines' house, Doug may have stayed to play with Burke. While playing in the basement, possibly with the Boy Scout knife or the nylon cord, an accident occurred. The play may have turned rough, resulting in JonBenét sustaining an injury, screaming, and subsequently being struck on the head, potentially with Burke's baseball bat or a golf club, and then strangled with the nylon cord. This sequence of events suggests that Doug could have been directly or indirectly involved in the actions leading to JonBenét's death, perhaps as part of an overly rough game that spiraled out of control. The unintended consequence was JonBenét's tragic death, with Doug's involvement hinging on his presence and participation in the basement activities. Following the incident, Doug may have been quickly removed from the scene to avoid implication. His parents, Susan and Glenn Stine, could have been called to pick him up, taking him back to their nearby home. The Stine family might have been aware of the incident, but chose to remain silent to protect their son, ensuring that no direct connection to Doug was established in the immediate aftermath. This rapid extraction would explain why Doug's presence at the Ramsey home was not officially documented that night. However, this hypothesis has significant weaknesses. There is no direct evidence confirming that Doug was at the Ramsey house when JonBenét died. It remains unclear whether he stayed over or simply visited briefly when the Ramseys dropped off the gift. Furthermore, the physical evidence, such as the high-tech boot print and the Boy Scout knife, is more directly linked to Burke than to Doug, weakening the case for Doug's direct involvement. Without concrete proof of his presence or actions at the critical moment, this hypothesis relies heavily on speculation, making it challenging to substantiate. Another more potential branch that the Stine family assisted the Ramsey family in covering up the truth surrounding JonBenét Ramsey's death is rooted in several key observations about their actions following the tragic event. Susan Stine, often referred to as Patsy's Pitbull, demonstrated a fierce loyalty to the Ramsey family, particularly to Patsy Ramsey, in the aftermath of the 1996 murder. This protective stance is most notably illustrated by allegations that Susan sent fraudulent emails impersonating Boulder Police Chief Mark Beckner. These emails, directed at individuals involved in the investigation, such as reporter Charlie Brennan, appeared designed to influence perceptions and possibly mislead those scrutinizing the case. For instance, one email praised Brennan's article, suggesting alignment with the Ramsey narrative. and was traced back to Susan's address in Atlanta through a search warrant executed on Earthlink. This act of interference points to a deliberate intent to shape the investigation's direction. The scenario proposed by this hypothesis begins with the immediate aftermath of JonBenét's death on December 26, 1996. It posits that after discovering the tragedy, the Ramsey family reached out to the Stines for assistance. Susan Stine, given her assertive personality and loyalty, may have helped craft a narrative to divert attention from the true circumstances of the crime. One theory suggests she could have encouraged or even assisted in drafting the ransom note, a document widely regarded as suspicious due to its length and specificity, to mislead investigators into believing an external intruder was responsible. Intriguingly, despite living just 84 seconds away from the Ramsey home, closer than any other friends, the Stines were not summoned to the crime scene that morning, unlike the Whites, Fernies, and a pastor. This absence could indicate a strategic choice to keep the Stines at a distance, avoiding any direct association with the chaotic scene that might have implicated them. Susan's alleged fake emails further support this scenario, as they aimed to manipulate information flow, potentially pressuring journalists and investigators to adopt a narrative favorable to the Ramseys. These actions suggest a calculated effort to obscure the truth, whether by misdirection or active interference. Following the initial response, the Stines' actions continued to align with a pattern of support that may have served to protect the Ramseys. From mid-February 1997, the Ramseys lived with the Stines in Boulder until Burke Ramsey completed his school year. During this period, Susan took on a significant role, described as a house mother, nursemaid, and Florence Nightingale, helping the Ramseys navigate the intense media and investigative pressure. This arrangement provided a controlled environment where the Ramseys could regroup while possibly being monitored or advised by the Stines. The subsequent decision by Glenn Stine to leave his job at the University of Colorado and relocate his family to Atlanta, where he worked for John Ramsey's company, further indicates a long-term commitment to the Ramseys' interests. This move, coupled with Burke staying with the Stines while the Ramseys were in Maryland, suggests a sustained effort to maintain close ties, potentially to ensure alignment in their stories or to safeguard shared secrets related to the case. Despite its plausibility, like the previous theory, this hypothesis has notable weaknesses. There is no direct evidence linking the Stines to the physical cover-up at the crime scene, such as the creation of the ransom note. Susan's fake emails, while deceptive, could be interpreted as an overzealous act of loyalty to a friend rather than proof of involvement in concealing a crime. Moreover, there is no concrete information indicating that the Stines had specific knowledge of what transpired the night JonBenét died. Their actions might simply reflect a deep personal allegiance to the Ramseys, driven by friendship rather than complicity in a criminal act. Without definitive proof, such as testimony or physical evidence tying them to the cover-up, the hypothesis remains speculative, relying heavily on circumstantial connections and the Stines' unusual dedication to the Ramsey family. If this cover-up is real, who were they protecting? The prevailing theory points to shielding Burke, but if so, involving the Stines seems counterintuitive, as limiting the number of people aware would be more logical, unless the cover-up aimed to conceal something far greater. The case of JonBenét Ramsey has long been shrouded in speculation, with numerous theories attempting to explain the circumstances surrounding her tragic death. Among these, one prominent hypothesis suggests that John Ramsey, through his company Access Graphics, may have been involved in illegal activities, such as drug trafficking, money laundering, or a combination of both. These theories stem from the Ramsey family's lavish lifestyle, the rapid success of Access Graphics, and its acquisition by Lockheed Martin, a corporation with a controversial history. One theory posits that John Ramsey may have used his private airplane to transport illegal drugs. This idea is based on his known hobby of flying, including using his plane to attend business meetings in California, a practice that reportedly displeased Lockheed Martin. the parent company of Access Graphics. The Ramsey family's extravagant lifestyle, which included private planes, boats, luxury cars, and extensive home renovations, appeared to exceed what might be expected from legitimate earnings, especially given John's checkered career history. Before marrying Patsy Ramsey, John faced multiple job terminations, including one for embezzlement to fund his expensive hobbies, such as flying and maintaining a Porsche. It suggests that Boulder, Colorado, where the Ramseys relocated in 1991, was a wealthy but corrupt community, potentially providing a conducive environment for illegal activities like drug trafficking. Furthermore, Lockheed Martin's predecessor, Martin Marietta, had a documented history of scandals, including a $100 million fine for supplying defective aircraft parts to the government and arrests of employees for drug-related crimes in the 1980s. This backdrop fuels speculation that John could have exploited his position and Lockheed Martin's lax oversight to engage in drug trafficking, using his plane to move illicit substances undetected. Another hypothesis suggests that John Ramsey used Access Graphics as a front for money laundering. Access Graphics, a relatively small intermediary company that did not manufacture products, achieved significant profits within 5 years of its founding, which seems disproportionate to its scale and role. Lockheed Martin's acquisition of the company and appointment of John as CEO, despite his lackluster professional track record, raises questions about the motives behind the deal. It notes that Lockheed Martin provided more oversight of Access Graphics, as long as financial figures appeared satisfactory, potentially creating an opportunity for John to funnel illicit funds through the company's transactions. The Ramsey family's wealth, which included 2 homes, frequent travel, and charitable activities, further supports the idea that their income may have come from questionable sources. The rapid dissolution of Access Graphics by Locke following JonBenét's murder is cited as suspicious, possibly indicating an attempt to distance the corporation from any illicit activities associated with the company. A third possibility combines the drug trafficking and money laundering theories, suggesting that John Ramsey may have used his airplane to transport drugs and then laundered the proceeds through Access Graphics. This scenario would explain both the family's wealth and the lack of transparency in their financial dealings. It highlights John's lavish spending habits, which persisted even after his first marriage ended in divorce due to financial strain and infidelity. After marrying Patsy, her affluent family provided significant financial support, including purchasing a home and aiding John's business ventures. However, this support alone may not account for the extent of the Ramseys' wealth. Lockheed Martin's history of scandals, including fraud and drug-related issues at Martin Marietta, lends credence to the idea that Access Graphics could have been a vehicle for concealing illegal profits. The company's quick dissolution after the crime and the Ramsey family's continued spending on legal defense, a new home, and maintaining their lifestyle, despite claims of financial constraints, such as Patsy lacking health insurance, further fuel these speculations. The behavior of the Ramseys and their close associates following JonBenét's murder also raises questions about possible efforts to conceal illegal activities. John and Patsy may have known the perpetrator, but refrained from disclosing their identity to protect themselves from exposure of illicit dealings. Such exposure could have led to asset forfeiture and legal prosecution, outweighing the consequences of obstructing a murder investigation. The Ramsey family's continued association with the Stine family, particularly Susan Stine's protective behavior and Glenn Stine's employment at John's company after relocating to Atlanta, is seen as potentially indicative of efforts to control information and maintain a network of loyalty. Additionally, the ransom note found at the crime scene, with its unusual length and phrasing, is interpreted as a possible attempt to explain forensic evidence, such as foreign DNA found on JonBenet, and to misdirect investigators. The erratic behavior of friends like Fleet White, who reportedly took extensive notes and exhibited controlling tendencies, adds to the perception of a broader cover-up. Despite the compelling nature of these hypotheses, they have significant weaknesses. There is no direct evidence, such as financial records, witness testimony, or law enforcement findings, linking John Ramsey to drug trafficking or money laundering. The theories rely heavily on circumstantial factors, such as the Ramsey family's wealth, John's career struggles, and Lockheed Martin's history of scandals. Alternative explanations exist. The Ramsey family's wealth could be attributed to legitimate sources, such as Patsy's family support or Access Graphics' success in a booming tech market. The dissolution of Access Graphics might reflect corporate restructuring rather than an attempt to conceal wrongdoing. Similarly, the behavior of associates like the Stines could stem from personal loyalty rather than involvement in a cover-up. The ransom note and foreign DNA, while suspicious, could be explained by other factors, such as contamination or an intruder, without necessitating a complex conspiracy. In conclusion, the hypotheses of drug trafficking and money laundering offer a framework to explain the Ramsey family's wealth, the rapid rise of Access Graphics, and their behavior following JonBenét's murder. Lockheed Martin's troubled history adds plausibility to these theories, suggesting an environment where oversight may have been lax. However, without concrete evidence, these remain speculative interpretations. The Ramsey case continues to captivate due to its unresolved nature and the possibility that key pieces of the puzzle, whether related to illegal activities or personal secrets, remain hidden. Injustice reign. The city of Boulder, Colorado, often portrayed as a picturesque, affluent, and liberal community with a population of approximately 90,000, has been described as harboring underlying issues of corruption, particularly in the context of the JonBenét Ramsey case. This perception stems from various sources, including the writings of Steve Thomas, a former detective involved in the investigation, who suggested in his book that corruption in Boulder may run deeper than what he could fully articulate or uncover. While Thomas did not provide concrete evidence of systemic corruption directly tied to the Ramsey case, his remarks contribute to a narrative of systemic issues within the city's institutions, particularly in law enforcement and judicial processes. The perception of corruption was amplified by later developments involving BPD personnel. In 2022, 5 Boulder police officers, including a key investigator in the Ramsey case, faced disciplinary action for failing to adequately investigate cases. John Andrew Ramsey, JonBenét's half-brother, publicly criticized one of these investigators for neglecting leads, including DNA evidence, and described the officer's reassignment as a demotion. These incidents reinforced the narrative of incompetence or negligence within the BPD, with some interpreting them as indicative of deeper systemic issues. Among the theories relating to JonBenét and her contests, one of which suggests that the 6-year-old may have been targeted by a child filth ring due to her participation in child beauty pageants. This hypothesis, prominently explored by author Stephen Singular in his book Presumed Guilty, posits that JonBenét's involvement in pageants, where she wore elaborate costumes, heavy makeup, and performed in ways some deemed provocative, could have drawn the attention of predators or those involved in illicit networks. Singular argues that the intense focus on JonBenét's parents, John and Patsy Ramsey, during the investigation overshadowed other possibilities, such as the involvement of external perpetrators tied to child exploitation. He suggests that the Ramseys may not have been directly responsible for their daughter's murder, but may have inadvertently placed her in danger by exposing her to the pageant world, where she could have been noticed by dangerous individuals. Singular notes that the grand jury in the case did not recommend charging the Ramseys with murder, but rather with child abuse or endangerment for putting JonBenét in a risky environment, highlighting concerns about the potential dangers of the pageant circuit. JonBenét's participation in child beauty pageants is central to this theory, guided by her mother, Patsy, a former beauty queen. JonBenét competed in numerous pageants, wearing glamorous outfits and performing routines that required singing, dancing, and significant financial investment in costumes and training. After her murder, media coverage widely circulated images and videos from these events, sparking debate about whether her inappropriate presentation could attract predators or those involved in child filth networks. The pageants, while a legitimate activity, placed JonBenét in a public spotlight that some believe could have made her a target for individuals with nefarious intentions, amplifying speculation about a connection to illicit activities. Several individuals with ties to child filth have been considered in relation to the case, though none have been definitively linked to JonBenét's murder. Gary Howard Oliva, a registered offender living near the Ramsey home at the time of the crime, emerged as a suspect after his 2000 arrest for drug possession, during which he was found carrying a photo of JonBenét and a stun gun. Potentially significant, as some investigators speculated a stun gun was used in the murder. In 2016, Oliva was arrested again for distributing child filth after Google reported 22 images of children under 10 uploaded from Boulder IP addresses. Despite John Ramsey's initial belief that Oliva could be the killer, DNA evidence from the crime scene did not match Oliva's, leading to his elimination as a suspect. Similarly, Randy Simons, a photographer who took pictures of JonBenét for her pageants, raised suspicions due to reports from other mothers about inappropriate photos of young girls displayed in his studio. After the murder, Simons proactively contacted parents to assert his innocence, though he was not initially a suspect. His 1998 arrest for public indecency and 2019 conviction for downloading child filth in Oregon further fueled speculation, but no DNA or other evidence connected him to the crime. John Mark Carr, a teacher who confessed to the murder in 2006, also had a history of child filth charges in 2001, but fled before prosecution. Despite his detailed knowledge of the case, Carr's DNA did not match the crime scene evidence, and he was ruled out as a suspect. Furthermore, the JonBenét Ramsey case has been strongly marred by controversial decisions made by Boulder authorities, particularly the Boulder Police Department and the District Attorney's Office, which have fueled public skepticism and speculation about the integrity of the investigation. From the outset, the handling of the Ramsey family, John and Patsy Ramsey, in particular, drew criticism for perceived favoritism, as authorities appeared to treat them more as victims than suspects. This perception was amplified by the DA's office, allowing the Ramseys' legal team unprecedented access to police files, a privilege rarely afforded in homicide investigations. Regular meetings between the Ramseys' attorneys and a DA liaison further deepened suspicions of an overly cozy relationship, suggesting that the family's wealth and influence may have shaped the investigation's direction. These actions set the stage for accusations that the authorities were either incompetent or unduly influenced, casting a long shadow over the case's credibility. One of the most contentious decisions was the handling of the grand jury's recommendations in 1999. After extensive deliberation, the grand jury voted to indict John and Patsy Ramsey on charges related to child abuse and accessory to a crime, reflecting their belief that the Ramseys had placed JonBenét in a dangerous situation or aided someone responsible for her death. However, District Attorney Alex Hunter declined to sign the indictment, citing insufficient evidence to proceed to trial. This decision, which only became public in 2013, sparked outrage among those who believed the Ramseys should have faced legal consequences. Critics argued that Hunter's refusal to prosecute was influenced by the family's prominence and resources, as the decision seemed to contradict the grand jury's findings. The lack of transparency surrounding this choice further fueled speculation that the Ramseys' social and financial status afforded them special treatment, allowing them to evade accountability. Another controversial move came in 2008 when District Attorney Mary Lacy issued a public letter exonerating the Ramsey family. Based on unidentified male DNA found on JonBenét's clothing, Lacy declared the Ramseys completely cleared of suspicion, a bold statement that stunned investigators who had spent years building a case against them. This decision was widely criticized as premature, particularly because the DNA evidence, known as touch DNA, was not conclusively linked to the killer and could have come from incidental contact. A former investigator from the DA's office expressed dismay, arguing that Lacey's close relationship with the Ramseys compromised her objectivity. The exoneration was seen as a public relations move rather than a legally sound conclusion, further eroding trust in Boulder's judicial system. Some investigators felt it dismissed years of evidence pointing to the family, while others saw it as an attempt to shift focus away from the Ramseys without sufficient justification. The rift between the Boulder Police Department and the DA's office added another layer of controversy to the case. The police primarily viewed the Ramseys as suspects, focusing on inconsistencies in their accounts and the unusual ransom note found at the scene. In contrast, the DA's office, particularly under Lacey, leaned heavily toward the intruder theory, which posited that an unknown outsider committed the crime. This fundamental disagreement led to a fractured investigation, with the two agencies working at cross purposes. A private investigator hired by the DA's office resigned in frustration, citing the police's refusal to consider evidence supporting an intruder. The public airing of this conflict highlighted a lack of coordination and raised questions about whether external pressures influenced the DA's stance. The perception that the Ramseys were shielded by the DA's office, while the police were sidelined, intensified suspicions of favoritism or worse. Rumors of bribery swirled around John Ramsey, fueled by his wealth as the CEO of Access Graphics, a subsidiary of Lockheed Martin, and the family's lavish lifestyle. The Ramseys' ability to hire top-tier legal representation and delay police interviews for months until April 1997 for initial statements and June 1998 for formal questioning suggested to some that they wielded undue influence. Public discourse, particularly in online forums, pointed to their financial resources as a means to manipulate the investigation, with speculation that John Ramsey may have used his wealth to sway authorities. The case of Thomas C. Miller, a Boulder attorney indicted in 1999 for allegedly offering $30,000 to a handwriting expert for a copy of the ransom note, further stoked these rumors. Although authorities suggested Miller acted on behalf of a tabloid rather than the Ramseys, the incident fed into a broader narrative that money was changing hands to control the case's outcome. The lack of transparency around these events only deepened public mistrust. The Ramseys' continued connections with influential figures in Boulder also contributed to bribery speculation. After the murder, their close relationship with a prominent local couple, who provided support and even relocated with them to Atlanta, raised eyebrows. The husband of this couple was later employed by John Ramsey's company, prompting questions about whether such arrangements were part of a broader effort to maintain loyalty and control information. The DA's office's leniency, particularly under Mary Lacey, who maintained a sympathetic stance toward the Ramseys, further fueled rumors that financial or social influence played a role. However, no concrete evidence, such as financial records or witness testimony, has ever substantiated claims of direct bribery by John Ramsey. The rumors largely stem from the family's wealth, their ability to afford extensive legal defense, and the perception that they received preferential treatment compared to less affluent suspects in similar cases. The authorities' failure to pursue alternative suspects aggressively also drew criticism and fed into the narrative of undue influence. Several individuals with troubling backgrounds, including a registered offender living near the Ramsey home, were investigated but quickly dismissed due to mismatched DNA or lack of follow-up. The police's focus on the Ramseys, while ignoring other leads, was seen by some as a deliberate choice to avoid challenging powerful interests. John Ramsey himself criticized the police for not utilizing advanced DNA technologies, such as genetic genealogy, to test additional evidence, a point echoed by a documentary filmmaker who noted the department's reluctance to share updates with the family. This lack of progress, combined with the DA's public support for the Ramseys, reinforced the belief that the investigation was compromised, whether by incompetence or external pressures. Ultimately, the controversial decisions in the JonBenét Ramsey case ranging from the refusal to prosecute the Ramseys to the public exoneration based on contested DNA evidence, have left a lasting impression of a flawed and possibly biased investigation. The rumors of bribery, while unproven, persist due to the Ramseys' wealth, their connections, and the authorities' inconsistent actions. The case remains a stark example of how wealth and influence can shape public perception, even in the absence of definitive evidence of corruption. Without concrete proof of bribery or a resolution to the case, these controversies continue to haunt Boulder's legacy, leaving the truth about JonBenét's murder obscured by doubt and speculation. The JonBenét Ramsey case, nearly 3 decades unresolved, offers profound lessons about the workings of the modern justice system, exposing its vulnerabilities and the critical roles of its institutions. The case underscores the importance of competence, coordination, and impartiality among law enforcement, prosecutors, and judicial bodies. The Boulder Police Department's mishandling, coupled with the district attorney's office's perceived favoritism toward the Ramsey family, revealed how breakdowns in these functions can erode public trust. Effective investigations require skilled evidence handling, transparent communication, and unified strategies, yet the Ramsey case showed how internal conflicts and biases can derail justice, leaving a child's murder unsolved. The case also highlights the peril of wealth and influence skewing legal processes. The Ramseys' ability to secure top-tier legal representation and delay police interviews raised questions about unequal treatment, suggesting that affluence can afford protections unavailable to others. This disparity challenges the principle that justice should be blind, exposing how socioeconomic status can shape outcomes. The grand jury's recommendation to indict the Ramseys, overruled by the DA, and the controversial exoneration based on contested DNA evidence further illustrate how decisions can appear swayed by external pressures, whether real or perceived. If authorities were indeed compromised through bribery, as rumors suggest, the implications are dire. Corrupted institutions undermine the rule of law, allowing the powerful to evade accountability while victims, like JonBenét, are denied justice. Such corruption would erode public faith, discouraging cooperation with law enforcement and weakening societal trust in governance. The Ramsey case, with its unproven allegations of influence, serves as a cautionary tale about the fragility of justice when institutional integrity is questioned. It emphasizes the need for robust checks, transparency, and accountability to prevent systemic failures. Ultimately, this case teaches that justice demands unwavering commitment to fairness, lest it become a privilege for the few rather than a right for all.